Okay.
Okay, so we're gonna start. Let me, can you, am I the host or not, Mr.?
Yes, you are co-host.
Okay, so can you, all right, so put me, if you can put me in the middle, I would appreciate that. Pin me. Let me pin myself.
Right.
All right. So if you could mute the
Oh,
two,
got it. Yeah.
yeah,
Where are we?
but as I, could you mute the two participants, please?
It's coming.
Okay.
Wait a minute. Oh, here we go. Got it.
Okay.
Okay. Saeed Asadullah. Saeed, welcome.
Yes.
Can you hear my voice?
I would
Yeah,
appreciate if the other hosts.
Brother, somebody make me host. I must not be host.
You know,
I was
آقا
let me know.
آقای آوایی لطفاً منو هاست کنید، خودتون که هاست میشید لطفاً.
هر کی هست میشه لطفاً دو تا پارتیسیپنت ها رو میوت بکنید تا من شروع کنم.
لطفاً
میوت بکنید هر دو رو که من بتونم شروع کنم اینتراپشن نباشه.
اجازه بدید آقای چیز رو من ببینم. خیلی خوب.
آقای بورل هم میوت شدم for the time being.
بله. بذارید آقای بورل هست، کجا تشریف دارن؟
دیوید بورل.
Right.
میوت شدن؟
آقای آوایی بفرمایید شما. کارو شروع کنید ایشون.
شروع کنم آجا؟
اجازه بدید. آقای آوایی مسلط بشه به کار.
من for the time being تصاویر دو تا بزرگوار رو استاپ میکنم تا شروع کنم.
شما بفرمایید، فقط ریکوردم شروع شد. بفرمایید.
شروع؟
Recording is already going on. I have already started. Yeah.
Okay. In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. My name is Hamid Tehrani, and as the Director of Communication at the Islamic College, it is my honor as well as my pleasure to welcome you to the third session of Vistas to the East program. As you can see in the background to my image, there is some noise. Could you mute whatever noise? Be careful. As you can see in the background, there is a photo of the Islamic College. We are a college in Northwest London, and we have been in existence for more than 2 decades. We have been offering MA and BA programs in-house, and also we have been offering MA in distance education. The Islamic College is a college which has been established to strengthen the intellectual foundation of the Muslim community in the West, and especially the Muslim community in the UK. The programs that we have been sponsoring for the past year is called Vistas to the East, which is an interactive discussion series between Eastern and Western scholars. In the past, we have had 2 programs. Tonight, we're honored to have 2 distinguished scholars who will talk about Mullah Sadr's philosophy, continuity, and novelty. We're going to hold this session up to 8:30 p.m. London time. And I would appreciate if all the participants keep their microphones mute until they're asked to contribute. Let me introduce the two distinguished scholars. First, Professor David Bakewell Burrell is an American educator, theologian, writer, and translator. He is the Theodore Hesburgh Professor Emeritus in Philosophy and Theology at University of Notre Dame, USA. He has written and published extensively on Judeo-Christian and Islamic traditions. Professor Burrell has written extensively on philosophy and on theology, and we are really honored to have him with us tonight. The professor who will be discussing his ideas on Mullah Sadr's philosophy with Professor Burrell is Professor Mohammad Fanai, who studied both at the Qom Seminary in Iran as well as McGill University in Montreal, Canada, where he received his PhD in philosophy. For the past two decades, he has been lecturing on comparative philosophy, mysticism, and theology at Imam Khomeini Education and Research Institute in Qom. He has published more than 50 books and articles in Persian on different areas of Islamic thought. So in today's discussion, we're going to start with Professor Burrell, who will make his presentation for 15 minutes, followed by Professor Fanai, who will make his presentation for 15 minutes. And then we'll continue on this basis, one person, one participant after another, and hopefully we can have a fruitful discussion afterwards at the end of our program. Without further ado, may I ask Professor Burrell to go ahead and activate his camera and turn on his microphone, and we are going to pin him to the middle of the page. And let me unpin myself. Professor Burrell, the floor is yours. Please turn on your camera, and you have 15 minutes. Professor Burrell, could you turn on your microphone first and then your camera?
Royal Engine Star this evening, Warwick, Solihull, Stratford, Neighbour, Wall Street, Snow Hill, Jerry Quarter, Children Railways, West Midlands Services, Royal Engine Star.
Okay, until Professor Burrell is able to turn on his camera, I'm going to introduce a few of the publications that we have had, which deals with Mullah Sadr's philosophy. Hopefully by the time that I have finished this short presentation, all the technical issues have been solved. As you can see, one of the works that we have published recently, not recently, this was published a decade ago on Mullah Sadr's philosophy and Heidegger's philosophy. It's called From Essence to Being. It is authored by Professor Muhammad Kamal, who is teaching at University of Melbourne. In the meantime, okay, so Professor Burrell's image is there. If we could have his microphone on so we can have it. Okay.
Very good.
Go ahead, please.
Good. Thank you very much, Hamid.
Thank you.
Let me say that when I first began to study Islam, I was very taken with Al-Ghazali particularly, but it was only in 1999 that I discovered Mullah Sadra at the first Mullah Sadra conference. And when I did discover him, I realized how close he was in affinity, that is how close he was in thought and in spirituality with Thomas Aquinas. Now, we Catholics celebrate today the feast of Thomas Aquinas. So that's a wonderful sign. That's a wonderful omen of our situation, because Thomas Aquinas discovered the way in which Islamic philosophers following Aristotle had opened him up to speak of a one God. So the focus of my talk will always be of the fact that Jews, Christians, and Muslims all agree that God was created freely, that the universe was created freely by God. Can you understand me okay? All right. And so I will never forget in Qom. It was a late night session in Qom, and one of the Ayatollahs came in and he singled me out. He looked at me especially, and he said, as Shiite Muslims love to be philosophical in their thinking, he said to me, "Can you prove the free creation of the universe?" And I answered, "Of course not, because it is free." And that really began our discussion. So one of the reasons that I am very taken with Mullah Sadra is that he was able to move beyond an emanation of the universe to the free creation of the universe. And that is absolutely central to Judaism, Christianity, and to Islam. So my answer to the Ayatollah was, no, you cannot prove free creation because it is free, right? Okay. Anyway, that was my introduction to that. Now, let me put it this way. I want to talk about Mullah Sadra. There's a book I have written called Journeying to Mullah Sadra. You'll probably find it in Google. And the narrative, however, needs a plot. And the part of thinkers of each of the Abrahamic faiths readily supply the plot. The struggle to articulate the relation between the created universe and the singular source. Moreover, what makes the relation quite ineffable, impossible to really spell out, the relation between the one God and the universe, the creator and the universe. That the key to it is that creating is the free action of one God. So unsurprisingly, it will be philosophical theology which shapes the now extended narrative, moving us beyond the ways in which Al-Farabi and Ibn Sina employed the model of logical deduction to present creating as a timeless and even necessary emanation from the one. For while emanation is a metaphor which can move in diverse directions, it is clearly, as it clearly does in Plotinus, the deductive model inhibited as blocked a clear elucidation of the distinction between the creator and creation. Now, even Ibn Rushd, who had little to say about theology, little patience with Ghazali's critique of the philosophers, so-called falsafa in Islam, had even less hope that Ibn Sina's scheme, adapted from Al-Farabi, could articulate the act of creation. In his own attempt to clarify that, is Ibn Rushd's own attempt to clarify that, while subtly imitating Islamic tradition and Quranic precedents in its focus on practical reason, set the stage for the trek back to Andalusia, from Andalusia to the heartland of the Levant, in the persons of Suhrawardi, Ibn Arabi, and Sadr ad-Din al-Shirazi, Est Mullah Sadra. All of these thinkers are explicitly beholden to Ibn Sina. Yet, each will endeavor to adapt the philosophical model of inquiry to articulate the relation between creation and the creator. So their agenda, singly and cumulatively, that is, agenda of Suhrawardi and Mullah Sadra, brings explicitly theological issues to the fore. However, each of them still to be taken with philosophical concerns similar to that central one with epistemology, or of Ibn Arabi, searching for ways to articulate the unique relationship between Mullah Sadra with bringing a bevy of philosophical issues under the ambit, under the reach of existing as a result from the one who is existing. In other words, the relationship between the creator and creation turns on the unique character of existing, which cannot be articulated philosophically, but as Mullah Sadra often says, can be shown to be, because it's shown to be beyond elucidation, beyond description, because it's like pointing out someone who suddenly appears in front of you. When that person appears in front of you, you do not need any further demonstration. The person is there. That's similarly true with our understanding of existing. Existing people are different from created characters in a novel. Existing people show an inherent connection to the creator of the universe. That's my thesis. That is Mullah Sadra's thesis. That is Al-Ghazali's thesis. So that's the sense in which philosophy, especially in the Ishraqi philosophy, is already theological in its outworking. That's enough, Tamid. Okay?
Okay, you have made a presentation which has lasted for only 12 minutes, so maybe for your next presentation, we'll give you a few more minutes.
Okay.
Okay, so if you could have Professor Fanai to make his 15-minute presentation. We'll be grateful. Let's ask the host, or if the host is not available at the moment, I will see if I can pin Dr. Fanai.
Glad to meet you, Professor Fanai.
Professor Fanai, could you please turn on your video and your voice and make your presentation? You have 15 minutes from now. Professor Burrell, please turn off your, okay. Professor Fanai, please turn on your
Yeah, do you have my voice?
as well.
Do you have my voice?
I have your voice. I don't have your video. Please turn on your video.
Microphone. Hello, do you have my voice?
I have your voice, but I don't have your video. Until you are able to turn on your video, let me introduce another book which has been published by the Islamic College on Mullah Sadra's philosophy. This one is called Transubstantial Motion and the Natural World, which is a translation of a part of Asfar of Mullah Sadra Shirazi. The other book that we have published, okay, so now that Professor Fanai is on, I will stop introducing our books one after another. Professor Fanai, the floor is yours for 15 minutes. Please go ahead. Please go ahead, Professor Fanai.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you for invitation and preparing this subject for discussion in this evening. In order to explain and understand Mullah Sadra's idea on the relation between creator and creatures created, as Professor Burrell mentioned, first we have to discuss briefly about his methodology. What is Mullah Sadra's methodology in his metaphysics? Mullah Sadra, in his methodology, which is based on his theory of knowledge, follows Quranic teaching. According to Quranic teaching, we have three ways for knowing metaphysical truth. One of them is reason, intellect. The other is revelation, prophetic revelation. And the third way for knowledge of the metaphysical truth is mystical revelation or mystical experience. All these three ways of knowledge is explicitly mentioned in different verses of the Quran. And Mullah Sadra is inspired by this teaching, so he tried to combine all these three ways of knowledge in order to discover the metaphysical truth. So his methodology is a pluralistic methodology, which based on multiple ways of knowing the truth. We know in Islamic tradition, we have different schools and different movements, intellectual movements and tendencies, each of which is based on one of these methods. For example, we have philosophers who mainly rely on reason, We have theologians who mainly rely on scriptures, religious scriptures and revelation. And we have mystics or Sufis who rely and benefit from their inner experiences. So we have these three major ways of knowledge and these three groups of scholars in Islamic tradition. Sometimes we are witnessing conflict between some of these groups. For example, some theologians criticize philosophers and their methods of thinking. And we have philosophers who reject a Sufi way of knowledge, and also Sufis who reject philosophers and theologians. And at the same time, we have from the very beginning of Islamic history, people who try to combine between all these methods. For example, Farabi make association between philosophical wisdom and prophetic revelation. Ibn Sina, who is a peripatetic philosopher in his in the last part of his life, he come to mysticism. I think I don't have a micro. My micro is off, I think. Okay. Ibn Sina, who was a rationalistic Aristotelian peripatetic philosopher, in the end of his life, he wrote Maqamatul Arifin, which is a treatise, part of is in his Isharat about Irfan and mysticism. Later, we have Suhrawardi, who believe in a hikmah, a kind of wisdom which is based on both rational thinking and mystical illumination, who is known as Al-Hakim al-Ashraqi, illuminationist philosopher. In his view, reason alone is not enough to give us a proper picture of the world, as intuition alone is not enough. We have to benefit from both of these two springs of knowledge. We have Nasiruddin Tusi, who tried to reconcile between theology and philosophy and established philosophical theology in his influential book, Tajridul I'tiqad. In the school of Isfahan, this attempt in reconciliation between these three ways of knowledge continues, especially in the works of Mir Damad, who was the teacher of Mullah Sadra. He was a philosopher, a theologian, a jurist, and a mystic. And finally, we have Mullah Sadra, who is familiar deeply with all branches of Islamic tradition, including theology, philosophy, Quranic exegesis, and Islamic mysticism. He finally established his metaphysics on the basis of this synthetic methodology, which benefits from revelation, reason, and mystical experience. Of course, he was deeply familiar with Ibn Arabi's mysticism, his speculative mysticism, which is very close to philosophical metaphysics and based on his mystical experience, is one of the major source of inspiration for Mullah Sadra. So Mullah Sadra, on the basis of this methodology, which is based on harmony between these different ways of knowledge, establishes his own metaphysics. And the revolution that he brought in metaphysics was not possible without this synthetic methodology. He tried to benefit from the heritage of Islamic philosophers, mystic theologians, and interpreters and commentators of Quran and Hadith. And in his work, we have commentaries on Ibn Sina's philosophy, on illuminationist philosophy. He has exegetical works, his interpretation of Quran and his commentary on Usul al-Kafi, which is a collection of Shia Hadith, shows his deep familiarity with all these traditions, which prepared him to create his own way of thinking in philosophy. So this kind of approach is based on harmony between reason and revelation, between reason and faith. Since religion, true authentic religion, shows the truth, and reason is also a way to understand the truth, so there must not be any conflict between reason and revelation. The same is true with regard to genuine mystical experience. If genuine mystical experience is a way toward truth, toward knowledge, then there must be harmony between findings of mystics and theologians and philosophers. Practically, Mullah Sadra was also a religious practitioner and a mystical practitioner who was a practical mystic. He lived in mystical life. So he had his own mystical experiences. Not only he was able to benefit from the teaching of mystics, but he was himself a mystic, and he has his own mystical revelations. So the metaphysics that he offers, he calls al-hikmatul muta'aliyah fil asfar al-arba'at al-aqliyah, transcendental wisdom in 4 intellectual journeys. So he arranged his philosophy according to spiritual journeys of mystics, to show that rational journey is in harmony with the spiritual and mystical journey. And the end of philosophy is ta'alluh, deification, similarity, assimilation to God, at-tashabbuh or at-takhalluq bi akhlaq Allah. So this is the end of wisdom and the goal of wisdom. So this is the way that he looks at metaphysics. Of course, his metaphysics is philosophy because it is committed to philosophical method, which is logical demonstration. So at the same time that he benefit from revelation and mystical experience, but what he present and what he claimed try to bring logical, philosophical argument and demonstration for his claims. So it includes philosophy in its historical sense, but it does not limit itself to philosophical method. It goes beyond it and try to have this synthetic methodology. This is what I can say in brief about his methodology. I hope in next part I will talk about his contribution in metaphysics and the way he interpret and analyze existence, and finally the relation between the creator and creatures. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Fanoi, for a very short and clear introduction. We're going to ask Professor Burrell to take the floor and make his second presentation. And I would see if I can activate Professor Burrell's camera. Professor Burrell, can you turn on your camera, please? Professor Burrell, please turn on your camera. Until Professor Burrell is able to turn on his camera so he can start his presentation.
There we are.
Okay, but yeah, please turn on your camera as well.
Yes. Is that right? Are we on it?
Your microphone is on, but your camera is not on.
Okay, where's the camera?
The lower left corner, start video.
Okay.
Okay, I'll take this opportunity to introduce another book published by ICAS Press, which is the publication arm of the Islamic College. This book is Spiritual Psychology, which is a translation of the fourth intellectual journey in transcendent philosophy, volume 8 and volume 9 of the Asfar, to which Professor Fanoi made his reference during his presentation. So the college for the past 2 decades has been publishing works after works on Mullah Sadr Shirazi, and we can claim that we are one of the most important centers in the West that's been promoting the philosophy of Mullah Sadr Shirazi. So Professor Burrell, if you are not able to turn on your camera, that's fine.
Yes, I should do right now.
Yeah.
Start my video.
Yeah, start your video. Okay, so please go ahead. You have 15 minutes, more than 15 minutes, because your last presentation was a bit short. So yeah, please go ahead.
Well, I am very excited by Professor Fanai's presentation, because there is so much that is cognate to philosophy as I see it in the West. But philosophical theology is what's focused. And my key person here is Ibrahim Khalil and his discussion of Mullah Sadr and theory of knowing. Because knowing is always appearance. It is not a conceptualized knowing. Knowing is always an appearance of the true. And here the connection that Professor Fanaz made between Heidegger and Mullah Sadra is very crucial, because truth appears. It does not something we formulate. The fact that a statement is true has to be on its face. It's like Wittgenstein saying that if God speaks, it is to the individual, the person who is listening. So for me, the connection between Mullah Sadra, particularly as Professor Fana has told us, that Fanai, I should say, not Fana, Fanai.
He's Fanai. He's supposed to become Fanal. Professor Burrell, could you kindly tilt your laptop so we can see your full face? Okay,
Okay.
that's yeah, keep it there.
Better?
Fantastic, great. Thank
Okay.
you.
Anyway, this has been a wonderful witness of how philosophy depends upon the faith, and the faiths can be very different, but they're all going towards one thing, which is the God who creates the universe. So it is not the God we construct, but the God who appears in our, if you will, mystical or reflective understanding. So I think that what I like so much about this exchange between Professor Fadai and me is that we are really very close. And it's a witness today of the world in which we live, that people with different faiths can come together. That's all I need to say.
Professor Burrell, you still have more time, so you can either talk about your past research on Mullah Sadra, past writing on Mullah Sadra.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so please go ahead.
Right. Well, the best thing I've done is a summary of Islamic philosophy in which Mullah Sadra becomes the capstone. And that was, I delivered the talk in Istanbul a few years ago, and it will be published in the United States at the University of Notre Dame, entitled The Questing for Understanding in Philosophy. But beyond that, I simply am taken with the fact that unlike the original presentation of falsifa in philosophy, which contrasted revelation with philosophy, as they understood falsifa from the West, that now the move is much more towards reconciling the two. And that's how I distinguish postmodern from modern. Postmodern for me is realizing that we cannot have a foundational understanding of truth as though there were fixed truths for everyone, but that we discover as we go. And it's very much like our understanding of our faith. What we know from the Quran or from the Bible is something that grows on us in our lives. It's not something that is given out there. It's something that we have to discover ourselves as we come to realize what God's word really means. So it's interestingly enough, it's never an oppositional position. It's not one against the other, but it is always assisting one another. And it's good that we celebrate that in what we Christians celebrate as the Feast of Thomas Aquinas, because in the 13th century, that's exactly what Thomas Aquinas did. Was able to recognize what is true in different philosophical traditions and in different faiths.
Professor Burrell, I know that you have made a comparison between Saint Thomas Aquinas and Mullah Sadra. So if you could
Yes.
kindly make a comparison, I'll be grateful.
Okay, thank you. It's very simple, actually. The standard philosophical view following Aristotle is, what is it? The philosophical view that Aquinas and Mullah Sadra bring is it? And the is becomes more important than the what. And how it is that we come to recognize that is that we realize that the world only makes sense to us if it is created. And the creation of the world means, of the universe, put it that way, always means that we are understanding things as best we can from God's point of view, but always in a way that is lacking what needs to be lacking, because we are human beings. So to me, the connection between Mullah Sadra and Aquinas is that we can never trust our formulations to yield the truth. The truth has to be lived into. It's lived into. It's a living interaction or commerce, if you will, between God and human beings. So that's why I was so taken, because I had done 20 years of study of Aquinas in the West. Why I was so taken when in 1999, I went to the Mullah Sadra conference and realized the richness of this man I had never heard of. So it's amazing discovery for me. That's enough.
Professor Burrell, why do you think that Aquinas was the first in, let's say, the ideas that Mullah Sadra developed were exactly the same as what Aquinas had formulated?
Isn't that amazing? There is no connection between the two. It's just that I think each were men of faith who discovered that conceptual philosophy was never enough. There had to be finally the experience of God's life within us. And that's what we particularly celebrate today with Thomas Aquinas. He was only 49 when he died. So how he got that realization so quickly is amazing. And just before he died, he said to his confrere, "All that I have written is so much straw." So in other words, what we try to say is much less than what can be shown. That's Wittgenstein, really. And so what we come to discover in discovering how God acts in our lives is that the one who is acting in our lives is the one who created us. That's the connection.
Have you read any critiques of your own views on this topic? And have you found any, for instance, justified criticism of your views on this issue?
No, I haven't really.
So
Some people who simply don't understand it.
Mhm.
And those would be philosophers largely of a Western persuasion who think there's too much faith in it.
Yeah.
But otherwise, see, my mentor here was a Canadian by the name of Lonergan, who taught me Thomas Aquinas in Rome in the 1960s. That's a long time ago. But so to me, the harmony, as Professor Fanahi was saying, the harmony between the two comes in trying to live out what it is that we have learned. When people want to come to learn someone's name who they just saw or just met, I always tell them, say the name, say it again, say it again. That's also how it is with faith. Try it again. Try putting it in a different way, because you can trust the wisdom that comes from the tradition, but you have to make it your own. Okay?
Thank you for your presentation. Now we're going back to Professor Fanahi,
Please.
and I would like both of these. I would like Professor Fanahi to see if he's able to critique your views on the similarity between the ideas raised by Aquinas and Mullah Sadra. Professor Fanahi, the floor is yours. You have 15 minutes.
Yes. As Professor Burrell mentioned, the question for Aristotle and many of his followers, like Messina, was the question of whatness.
That's right.
Or the question about essence. But for
Right.
Mullah Sadra, the question is about isness, about existence.
That's right.
As we know, in Aristotle metaphysics, the subject matter of philosophy is being, qua being. The same we have in Ibn Sina. He also stress and declares that the subject matter of philosophy is existence, wujud. But in their philosophy, should I say, their philosophy is not purely existential philosophy. In their cosmology and ontology, when they want to explain the reality of the world, they mainly benefit from the 10 famous categories, the categories of essences, substance, and
Right.
9 accidents. So these are explaining the world on the basis of essence,
Right.
not on the basis of existence.
Exactly.
And when in Ibn Sina's philosophy, we talk about existence and the relation between existing things, in this philosophy, existence are different totally. As
That's
we
right.
say in Islamic philosophy, they are mutabayin. They are totally different.
That's
When we
right.
come to Suhrawardi's philosophy, he is explicitly essentialist. He says what is in reality, what makes the reality of things are their essences, their qualities, and existence is a concept only in our mind. But when we come to Mullah Sadra's philosophy, he tried to explain the world, God, human being, the relation between God and the world on the basis of existence. He tries to offer a pure existential metaphysics. First, like others, he says, we have the concept of existence, the concept of wujud, which is self-evident. It is indefinable. We cannot define it, not because it is complicated, because it is self-evident. Everybody knows what does existence means. When we say God exists or a horse exists, we understand the meaning. Of course, this is the concept of existence. The reality of existence, however, if we want to know the reality of existence, we have to know it through knowledge by presence, not
Yes,
conceptual knowledge. Conceptual knowledge is not enough in understanding the reality of existence. Of course, the first encounter that we have with reality of existence is in our own self. When we are aware of ourselves, we are facing with our own existence. In our self-awareness, we have existential knowledge, not knowledge which is acquired by description or essence or knowing the definition. No, we are identical with ourself, and our self-awareness is our first contact with real existence. And of course, this is a bridge that we can go through it to know God, as the famous saying of Prophet says, who knows his Lord, knows God.
that's right.
So the first step is to say that the concept of existence is self-evident. The reality of existence must be known through experience and through direct and immediate contact. The second point is that this concept is a univocal concept. The concept of existence has one meaning. When we say God exists and when we say human being exists, the meaning is the same. Also, although there are differences between the existence of God and human existence, God exists, his existence is necessary, our existence is contingent, but they both are existent.
That's right.
So we have one meaning with different degrees, with gradation, as I will explain later. The third point is that existence and essence are different in mind. The concept of existence and the concept of essence are different. When we say human being exists, human being is the essence and existence is the concept. In our mind, they are two different concepts. One of them is subject, the other is predicate. But when we come into reality, we don't have two things. We don't have two separate and distinct things. We have one reality. When we say human exists, we should know and we should discover the reality is what? Whether the external reality is instance of existence or it is the instance of essence. Here he offers primacy of being, primacy of existence, which says that what makes reality is existence. And essence or quiddity is mental construction of reality. When it comes into our mind, we have different essences. But in reality, in external world, we have existence. Of course, different modes of existence and different degrees of existence. And this is the next step that he takes in his ontology, that says existence is a concept or a reality which has gradation, a gradational being, a
That's right.
gradational reality. We have necessary existence and we have contingent existence. Again, in the world, we have this hierarchy. We have the world of nature, we have the world of the imaginal world, the alamul mithal, and we have the world of intellect. So these all makes the construction of the world, the structure of the world, which is a hierarchical structure, but all kinds of being and all kinds of creatures and whatever we have in the world are different modes of being. We have nothing other than being. So if the reality is equal with existence, so we can say existence is one. We are facing with unity of being, because what makes reality is being, and being is one. But this unity within itself has multiplicity. This is not pure unity, pure monism, which exclude multiplicity. Multiplicity is self-evident. We have God, we have the world, we have human being, we have heaven, we have earth, we have all these different kinds of being. So existence is one and at the same time many. So why? Because existence is a kind of reality which has different degrees and different levels and different modes. What he calls a gradation of being. So he combines between unity of being and multiplicity of being. So we had, some mystics who emphasize on unity, and we have philosophers, peripatetic philosophers, or essentialist philosophers who believe in multiplicity. Mullah Sadra tries to combine between these two, to keep both unity and multiplicity. So on the basis of primacy of being, the primacy of being gives this ability to Mullah Sadra to explain both unity and multiplicity, and keep what mystics try to explain for us about the unity of reality, and what we feel and see with our senses and with our experiences, which we deal with different kind of multiplicity. So he tried to reconcile between these two ideas and explain both unity and multiplicity on the basis of primacy of being and the gradation of being. And on this starting point, he offers his ontology. He explained causality, the relation between cause and effect. So if reality is being and existence, so we have the existence of cause and existence of effect. We have God as the creator and the world as the created. So existence comes from existence. Existence of effect comes from the existence of the cause. Here he explained the relation between creator and creatures. So creatures are, in his view, act of God. They depend on God's will, so they are act of God. They don't have any independence from God. They are, as Quran says, words of God. When God creates, as if he is speaking, he is talking, and we are his words. As Quran says, things of this world are words of God, kalimatullah. Or about Jesus, Quran says, Kalimatullah, the word of God. The whole world and everything is word of God, of course, in different levels and in different degrees. So the world exists, but its existence is illumination of God, is act of God, is word of God, depends on God's will and depend on God's act. So this is the way that the world relate to God. We are not independent being. We are not separate from God. We are his act. We are his words. We are, in fact, his light. Allah Nur Samawat, God is the light of the heaven and earth. So this infinite light, when radiate, we have the world, we have creatures. And of course, human being has a special status in the world among creatures. As our mystics say, human being reflect the most names of God, is the greatest manifestation of God. Perfect man, or al-insan al-kamil, is the greatest manifestation of God, because God's names, which mean God's attributes, God's perfection, are reflected in perfect man more than in any other creatures. So on the basis of his principle on unity of being, on primacy of being, on the gradation of being, he explains the relation between cause and effect, the relation between necessary being and contingent being. And of course, in his explaining the nature, he discussed about substantial motion as the main feature and characteristic of nature, which moves and changes in its substance. This is primacy of being that allows Mullah Sadra to talk about substantial motion. According to primacy of essence, we cannot talk about substantial motions, because when substance changes, essences will change. Then nothing, we have nothing stable. But according to primacy of being, we have existence who go through different stages, which is called substantial motion according to Mullah Sadra's terminology. To conclude, Mullah Sadra's philosophy is the purest existentialist philosophy in Islamic history, which is based on primacy of being. And he can, in his philosophy, we can say that existence is the subject of philosophy, and he's loyal to this. He's loyal to this principle that existence is the subject of philosophy, and he takes it very serious and tries to explain and analyze reality on the basis of this existential principle.
Thank you very much, Professor Fanai, for your presentation. I think it's now time for opening the floor to questions. Professor Paya, could you turn on your microphone and your video and kindly ask your question? If Professor Pai is not ready, I will turn to Professor. You're ready? Please go ahead.
Thank you so much.
Please go ahead.
I should like to thank both the speakers for an illuminating talk. I have a question for Professor Burrell. I wonder whether he has my voice, he can hear me.
He can hear you. He can
All
hear
right.
you.
Okay, Professor Burrell, you talk about the status of truth, and you suggested that truth is manifest, and it should be present to the subject of knowing, to the subject, to the knower, through some sort of mystical experience of becoming united with the truth or being at the presence of the truth. Now, the point is that when you have those sort of personal mystical experiences, while you are going through that period of having the experience, you are not in the sphere of epistemic access to knowledge. There, you are in the state of becoming. You are part of a process of becoming. You are in an ontological space, in an ontological sphere, or an ontological plane, if you like. But when that fleeting experience comes to an end, then and there, you will have a chance to reconstruct your experience by means of your memory, your language, your concepts and categories which are available to you. What is being constructed is, of course, based upon your experience of being face-to-face with the truth, assuming that your experience had been a genuine experience, because there are non-genuine experiences as well. But assuming that the experience had been genuine, when you reconstruct that experience, then that is being regarded as a truth, which then you can present it to the public sphere and ask others to comment upon that.
Yes.
That second type of, the reconstruction or the formulation of your experience, then that belongs to the sphere of epistemology. That is what we call truth, because that is something which we can access and assess. Whereas your personal experience is just for you. Nobody have access to that. That may be a true experience, so that may be truth for you, but because others do not have access to it, they cannot comment on it. Thank you so much.
Yes. I think what is important there is that.
Professor Burrell, could you tilt your laptop?
Certainly, sorry.
Yeah, keep it there, please. Thank you.
What is important there is that we must trust the fact that we will hear objections, and often we will recognize that we were wrong. So part of doing philosophy is to recognize when someone else shows you what you missed. And it's always a continuing process. It's like Professor Fana reminded us that being is analogous. That is, Mullah Sadra uses the word gradation. Aquinas uses the word analogous. That is, things are like one another, but they are not the same. So the whole idea of being like but not the same leads us to better understanding of what we thought we knew. And that's part of what philosophy is always doing. And that takes place very simply in conversation with people. When we're trusting that we are seeking the same goal, we try to understand one another and criticize one another it in such a way as we can move forward together. Does that make sense?
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.
Okay, so the next question is by Professor Mohammed Legenhausen. Professor Legenhausen, would you like to spell out your question, or do you want me to read it?
Can you hear me?
Haj Mohammed, it's good to see you.
Please go
It's
ahead.
nice to see you too,
Isn't that
Professor
amazing?
Burrell.
If you could,
Takes
if
me
you could
back to
turn
It's
on,
been
home.
a long time.
Right.
if you could
Certainly
turn on
has
your
been.
video, that would be nice, Professor Legenhausen. If you're
I'm not in a condition to turn on the video.
okay, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead and
I have a question for both Professor Fanai and for Professor Burrell, which I think can help to bring them into further conversation. And that is to do with this very important issue that Professor Burrell raises in his presentation, and that he's raised in a number of other places. And that is the freedom of the divine choice to create.
Exactly.
In what sense is the divine choice to create free? What does it mean to attribute freedom to God's choice in that sense? And the second question is there also a sense in which that divine choice is necessary? Or is the necessity and freedom here completely incompatible with one another? And then again, this is a question for both Professors Fanai and Professor Burrell. Thank you.
thank
I would
you.
say the
Professor
important,
Legenhausen.
Professor Fanai first. You are first.
Okay, yes. Yes, God is free and absolutely free, because there is no force beyond God that can influence God. When we say we are free or we are not free, because we live in a world, we are influenced by different agents and factors because of our limitations. But when we talk about God, who is absolute power, omnipotent, omniscient, and everything other than God is his creatures. Everything else is depend on his will. So there is nothing to force God or to impose anything to God. Therefore, God is free because nothing can impact on God. So his freedom is absolute. Can we talk about a kind of necessity in God's action? Yes, at the same time, we can talk about necessity, because when God will something, then it becomes necessary. But this necessity is not in contradiction with his freedom of will. It is based on his will. Because he is perfect, he is generous, he gives necessarily. Because he is absolute beauty, he gives life, he gives light necessarily. But this necessity is not in opposition with freedom.
Exactly.
It is the consequences of his being.
Yeah, exactly.
Professor Fanai, you finished with your response to
Yes.
Professor
Yes.
Legenhausen? Professor Legenhausen, would you like to come back and reply to that response?
I think that that was excellent. an excellent reply, and I'm looking forward to the comment of Professor Burrell on the same issue.
Thank you. Professor Burrell, please go ahead.
Right. Well, the necessity of God's creation stems only from the wisdom of God's action. So God's action is necessarily wise, and in its wisdom, you can show what the realities must be. God does not need to follow any patterns, nor does God need to have any stimulus given to God. In that sense, God does not create for a reason except for himself. So there is necessity, but necessity that is God originated and God given. So in a funny way, it's misleading to speak about necessity, because necessity, we feel, has to do with patterns and ways of acting that we are confronted with. God is not confronted with anything except God's own self.
Thank you very much. Dr. Narmina Lamadma, could you kindly go ahead and ask your question? Dr. Narmina, are you online? Can you turn on your microphone and ask your question? Okay, so I'll read Dr. Narmina's question. She says, when you say gradation of being, is this the same as what Heidegger calls Dasein, or do you mean something else? So this is a question for both of the participants. Please reply to Dr. Narmina's question. Professor Burrell or Professor Fanahi, whoever wants to go ahead.
Yes, go ahead, please. When Mullah Sadra talks about gradation of being, he talks about gradation of being in its full sense. The whole being, the whole universe. It includes both creature and creator. So he does not talk only about human being. I think in modern existentialism, the focus is on the existence of human being. But Mullah Sadra's question is not limited on explaining the nature of human being. He talks about existence in general, which includes human being, the nature, the supernatural world, and God. The whole being constitutes a chain of cause and effect, and in each stage shows one degree of being, one mode of being. So I think there is a difference between the two, though there are similarities too.
Yeah, let me come in here. I think for Heidegger, there is something more basic called being. Whereas for Mullah Sadra and Aquinas, there are only ways of being, or you would say modes of being. And it's up to us to discover what mode of being we are talking about. And we can often only discover that in conversation with others. That's when we understand what it is we know. So I would emphasize conversation and ways of being, rather than think of being as a thing. Being is not a thing. There are things, and each of the things is a way of being, but being has many ways, many faces, and that is called Aquinas calls it analogy, and Mullah Sadra calls it gradation. Same idea, I think.
Okay, the next question is from Ms. Fatima Dosa. Please go ahead and ask your question, Ms. Dosa.
Give me 1 second. So peace and greetings me to everyone. Thank you to both the speakers. My question to the second speaker is that if you say, for example, human beings are essentially the word of God, how is free will of a human being reconciled with that view?
Who are we asking?
The question is open to both. I leave it to you both to answer it.
Okay, Fanais first.
Okay. So this question is not restricted to what I said, that the human being is the word of God. If we say the human being is created by God, the world is created by God, in any sense of creation, the same question will raise. Now we are explaining the mode of human existence and its relation to God, that Mullah Sadra says that everything that is created by God is God's act. How human being can have freedom of will? So God created a creature which has freedom of will. So our freedom of will is creation of God, depends on God's will. Our freedom of will is not absolute freedom. So we have freedom, but not absolute freedom. We cannot do whatever we wish. So our freedom is also limited as our existence is limited. Absolute freedom belongs to absolute being, who is God. So the size of our being determines the size of our freedom. As our being, our knowledge, our power, and all qualities that we have is limited to our being. So we have all these qualities in a limited way. And if we want to see the absolute freedom, we should look at God. And as much as we become close to God, our freedom and our other virtues will improve.
Fatima, could you give us the question once more?
The question I asked Professor Burrell is, the view of Mullah Sadra was that human beings are the actions or the act of God.
That's right.
And therefore, essentially, what I would understand it as an extension of God. I'm maybe not phrasing it the correct way. With all due respect, we are plebeians compared to you scholars. What I find hard to reconcile is how then does a human being have free will?
Okay.
Is it just an illusion
Yeah.
of free will?
Because freedom is exercised by, as Augustine loves to say, love God and do what you will. Wonderful expression. So freedom is exercised because we know that it comes from God. Therefore, it needs to return to God. Now, if we think of God as something other, something we have to fight against, then of course we're going to have difficulty with freedom, our freedom, and God's will. But if God's will is what brings us into being, so the more we are attuned to what is, we are attuned to God's will. And that's Augustine saying, love God and do what you will. Okay?
Thank you very much for both your explanations.
Right. Thank you, Fatima.
Well, since we are on that subject, and there was a discussion in Professor Fanai's presentation about Word of God, and Professor Burrell has led a life of a priest for more than 6 decades or 7 decades, I believe. What do you think about the similarity in the Islamic concept of Word of God and the Word of God in Christianity? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, or in the French Bible says, au commencement était la parole, et la parole était avec le Dieu. So,
Once again, Kalimat Allah
yes.
is an analogous term. There are many senses in which we as God's creatures are the Word of God. There's another sense in which when it is spoken by the prophet, or we would say by Jesus, it's another word of God. So the word, if you will, the word is already analogous. That is, it is gradated in Mullah Sadra's language.
Well, thank you. Let me go back to Professor Legenhausen. Professor Legenhausen, when you asked your questions, did you receive sufficient answer from both of the speakers, or did I somehow cut you off?
No, you didn't cut me off. And I'm very grateful for the answer from both of the speakers, but it's a topic about which I think many volumes could be written. I was thinking about, we say that because of the attributes of God, for example, God's generosity, there's a sense in which God had to create, because had he not created, he wouldn't have been who he is. He wouldn't have been that generous source of all generosity. And I was curious to find how this, this can be misinterpreted to mean that, oh, so there's something forcing God to choose to create, and that's his nature. So it's like God's will has to conform to this pattern, which is his nature, which is contrary to divine freedom. And I was curious about how both of the speakers would deal with that issue.
Professor Legenhausen, you have, of course, being in Hosea al-Miyah of Qom, you have come across this Hadith Qudsi, Kuntu kanzan makhfiya. I was a hidden treasure, and then I wanted to be known, therefore I created the khalq, the creation.
Yes.
Yeah, here in Qom, that hadith is not very popular here in Qom.
I know, but it is something that is quite apropos what you are talking about.
Yes, yes.
So God, in my opinion, God created the creation because of his love and because he wanted to be known. He had a desire to be known. And God, God can have desires. He is more than welcome. More than welcome to have any desire he wants.
See, this is the problem. If God doesn't create in order to fulfill his desires, this is just a kind of anthropomorphism. So in the tradition of Mullah Sadra, what God is doing is, his will is by tajalli. It's by manifesting who he is. And God is free in his manifestation, but I'm not going to give a speech. I was just curious about how the speakers would react to this aporia, this problem.
Thank you. Anybody, any of the participants, Professor Burrell, Professor Fanai, would like to talk about this?
Because when we talk about God's will, or as Hadith said, كنت كنزا مخفيا فأحببت أن أعرف. When they use the word desire, it is using in an allegorical way, not desire in the sense that we human have.
I willed it.
So, which shows that we need something. We need something, then yeah, we seek and we follow. Of course, this meaning is impossible for God. But in this kind of language, it is a kind of allegorical language that we have in poetry and mystical way of speaking. We should not translate it literally.
Very good.
Well, let's move on to a question by another participant, Shahida. Could Shahida please turn on the microphone and ask the question, please? Okay, well, if Shahida is not willing to turn on or able to turn on the microphone, then I will have to read it. Shahida says, we have now the knowledge of being present for self-awareness. How I think she means, how do we access this presence to experience our own existence? Questions for both speakers, please. So Professor Burrell, please go ahead.
All right, I will do that. I do not think we directly access our existence. We access it by conversation with others. It is the presence of others that elicits the presence of us. So that's very, very much an alignment that knowledge is not a solitary thing, but it is a communal thing. And we learn from one another. So also we try to instruct one another. And it's that, if you will, that back and forth circulation that means how we grow as philosophers through each other. Okay.
Okay, so maybe we should move on to Professor Fanai. Please go ahead.
Yes, this kind of knowledge that Professor Burrell talks, it's acquisitional knowledge, knowledge that we acquire, we learn. In Islamic epistemology, we say al-ilm al-husuli,
right?
Corresponding knowledge. But right. In self-awareness, we talk about our feeling of ourselves. Here, our awareness and our existence are identical. We are
right.
not two things. We don't have knowledge and being. Knowledge and being are identical in our self-awareness.
Right.
We are a kind of being which is aware of itself or himself or herself. So the concept of knowledge is different from the concept of I, but the reality are not separate. There is one reality which is aware of himself. And there is no distinction between subject and object in this kind of awareness.
But I think that the other is very important here, as Levinas has reminded us. The other, the presence of the other elicits my presence. And that is a common human experience.
Of course, if we want to increase and deepen our knowledge of ourselves, this conversation will help us.
Yes.
But the starting point is our essential self-awareness. If we are not self-aware, we cannot understand others' thought, like a stone. What is the difference between a human being and a stone? Which conversation is not helpful for a stone because he is not a self-aware creature. We are self-aware creature. Then we can benefit from others' knowledge and others' experience.
Right.
That's the second step.
Very good. Agreed.
Professor Burrell, let me ask you a question. Based on the understanding that you okay, can we mute the all right. Now I can talk.
Okay.
My question from Professor Burrell is, considering your understanding of Aquinas and Mullasadra, do you think that Aquinas discussed the idea of priority of existence over essence much more accurately and much more, let's say, carefully than Mullasadra? Because most of the philosophers believe that Mullasadra's philosophy is unprecedented, and no one before him actually discussed those ideas. And also, my question to Professor Fanai is this: do you believe that Aquinas preceded Mullasadra and preceded in the sense that he discussed all the ideas that Mullasadra raised, and he formulated those ideas much more carefully and much more systematically?
Let me put it this way. The formulation of those ideas depends upon the culture from which they come. So here we want to say, viva la différence. The difference is as important as the similarities. So what I have found in my own thinking is that watching Aquinas and Mullasadra rub off each other is where you and I learn. These are our masters. We learn and we try to put it our way.
Okay, Professor Fanai, what do you think about my question?
You know, as Professor Burrell mentioned, and I want to add, there are many commonalities between Islamic philosophers and Christian philosophers. A person like Mullasadra and Thomas Aquinas, they both are theistic philosophers, monotheist. They belong to Abrahamic religions. So this is a big commonality. They also have commonality in Greek philosophy because they are a student of
right.
Greek philosophy. So it brings a lot of commonalities among them. And also, as we know, Thomas Aquinas has read Ibn Sina's works and Ibn Rushd's works. So this is again bring a similarity between these two. So the similarity is not strange, seeing the similarities. And even in mystics of these two traditions, similarities are much more. Even their language are very similar and close. And today we also need, you know, cooperation and dialogue in order to strengthen our commonalities and to try to establish our common goal, like faith, morality, and peace in the world. So beside this, when we come to the discussion of Mullasadra's view of primacy of being, you know, Mullasadra explicitly discuss about this topic. And he has this concept of asalatul wujud.
Right.
And not only he, you know, claim or present such an idea. In his book, Al-Mashair, he summarizes arguments to prove priority of existence. He brings 8 arguments to prove primacy of existence. And then he talks about the consequences of this principle. So in this way, I haven't seen any philosopher before him, discuss this subject. Aquinas is really a genius, a great theologian and philosopher, but he discussed this topic in his little book on being and essence. His dealing of this topic is very brief and short, and he doesn't give us a term like priority of existence, or I haven't seen any proof arguments, for example, similar to Mullah Sadra, to prove the priority of existence, or discuss about the consequences of this principle, as Mullah Sadra writes, 9 volumes to explain what are the implications of this principle. So in this way, Mullah Sadra is unprecedented, in my view.
Professor Legenhausen, would you like to ask your question? Apparently you have another question.
No, I think that the presenters did a wonderful job of that, and I don't have anything else to add. Thank you.
Okay, so can we move on to Ali Muhammad? Apparently Ali Muhammad has a question. Please go ahead. Ali Muhammad, please turn on your microphone and ask your question. Well,
Salam.
Please go ahead.
Can this philosophy be used to generate science for management of society?
Your voice is cutting off, so let me read it. Ali Muhammad has asked how this ontology, does this ontology help to generate science, for example, management, sociology, and other necessary science? So, Professor Fanai, if you think this philosophy, i.e. Mullah Sadra's philosophy, can create science.
No, at all. Philosophy cannot create science. No philosophy can create science. Science is based on its own methodology, which is experimental. But philosophy can provide us with principles, epistemological principles, methodological principles that we need in our view in different fields of knowledge. And it gives us the whole picture of the world.
Let me interrupt you, Professor Fanai. Ali Muhammad has clarified what he meant. He has said, do you think that this philosophy can be extended for the management of society? In effect, for creating a social organization or creating a state, a nation state, for instance.
Philosophy alone cannot give us enough knowledge for creating a state, but it is necessary. It is necessary, but it is not sufficient. For a state, we need many things. We need philosophy, we need science, we need spiritual teaching, we need education. There are different factors. Philosophy is not replacement of other branches of sciences, but philosophy, the best service that philosophy can give us is to strengthen rationality. Philosophy gives us rationality. When we exercise rationality, of course, it will have positive effect on our management, on our society, because in any field, we need rationality. And this is what we expect from philosophy. But it does not mean that we don't need other branches of sciences in managing society and creating a state. Yes, philosophy is one of the important elements in creating a society, but it is not sufficient.
I think what Mr. Ahmed is referring is perhaps to some of the writings by certain scholars who have pointed out that Mullah Sadra actually created the foundation of what is now the Islamic Republic of Iran, because the ideas of the founder of the Islamic Republic of Iran was influenced by Mullah Sadra. I mean, he was really influenced by Mullah Sadra. So how do you address it?
The founder of Islamic Republic of Iran is influenced by Mullah Sadra, but at the same time he was influenced by Irfan of Ibn Arabi, and at the same time he was a jurist, a faqih, and a Islamicist, a scholar of Islam. So his idea of a state is originated from his understanding of Islam, which is a multidimensional school of thought. Its rationality comes from philosophy. Its spirituality comes from mysticism. Its rules and regulations come from fiqh or jurisprudence. So there is no one source for Imam Khomeini's idea in creating the state. Philosophy is one element and other elements in his thought.
You know what he means, or perhaps what he means is that, for instance, in Asfara Arbae, you go the different journeys, and the final journey is from Haq el al-Khal. So you come to the people after you have somehow ennobled yourself, you have made yourself who you are, you have made yourself a scholar, a philosopher, then you come back to the people and you try to change the affairs of the society and interact with people. So in that sense, I think that's why certain scholars have pointed that out.
I know, but I think that we should take into consideration all sources of knowledge, not only philosophy. Philosophy is one of the basic and fundamental branch of knowledge that has its impact on this idea, but philosophy is not alone. Philosophy alone is not enough. It doesn't give us rules and regulations. Imam Khomeini was a faqih, and he was someone who is familiar with hadith and Quran and Irfan. So all these different branches of knowledge, helped him to create his idea.
Okay, well, Professor Burrell, going back to the question that was raised before, can you hear me, Professor Burrell?
Yeah.
Remember that Professor Fanai said that Aquinas did not deal with the issue of primacy of existence.
He's wrong.
And he said that Mullah Sadra is the only philosopher who has written extensively about this and has provided 8 different arguments in support of that. What do you think about that, and how would you critique him?
I would simply say that Mullah Sadra has to work from the tradition he is working from, and Aquinas has to work from the tradition he is working from. But for each of them, the primacy of existence is primary for each of them. Now, some may find others' expressions different, but fundamentally for Aquinas, it is God who gives existence of all things in their being and in their essence.
Well, we have one last question, which I'm going to ask Ms. Fatima Dosa to ask her question again, and we'll probably wrap it up if there are no other questions. Fatima Dosa, please go ahead.
My question is, during Mullah Sadra's time, were there any active debates between himself and the atheists of his time?
The question is, was there any debates between Mullah Sadra and the atheists, mulhideen, of his time? So
we don't have any record of this. There is no indication of such conversation or discussion in the sources. There is no evidence for this.
So Professor Fanai, could you kindly expound on what groups came under Mullah Sadra's quote unquote attacks or criticism? From what I know, he dealt with the Sufis and he wrote the book, the famous book, which we have translated, by the way, at ICAS Press. It's called, I will remember the title.
Kasr al-Asnam al-Jahiliyyah.
Kasr al-Asnam. So Breaking the Idols of Ignorance, that's the title of the book, which ICAS Press has published. You can see in the links that I have provided. Could you expound on that so people like Ms. Fatima Dosa will also know how Mullah Sadr engaged in debates with others and was not always a recluse, and he was involved in critique and
of course
critique.
Mullah Sadr discuss with different groups and rejects different types of tendencies. He confronts with Zahiri thinkers, the religious thinkers who only understand religion literally and are not able or are not ready to go into the depth of the meaning of the Quran. So this is one group that Mullah Sadr criticized their understanding and interpretation. He also, as you mentioned, discussed with not Sufis, but pseudo-Sufis, the Sufi who are Jahil, people who are consider themselves as Sufi, but they didn't really touch the depth of Irfan and Sufism. So in his books that you mentioned, he attacked these ignorant Sufis who only satisfied themselves with some superficial way of Sufi lives without, going into the depth of their spiritual life and their intellectual life. And Mullah Sadr was, more than any person, he was influenced by Ibn Arabi, who was a great Arif and Sufi. So his criticism of Sufis is not criticism of Islamic mysticism. He himself was a mystic, and he has a great respect to mystics. And of course, he also criticized his previous philosophers, even philosophers that he respects and loves, like Ibn Sina and Sohrawardi. He loves them, but at the same time, he criticized some of their fundamental ideas. For example, in Sohrawardi, he criticizes his Asalatul Mahiyya, his belief in the primacy of essence. He criticized Ibn Sina in different issues. For example, in Ittihad al-Aql wal-Ma'qul, in the unity of knower and the known, and his rejection of substantial motion, and in different questions, his idea about the resurrection, Mullah Sadr criticizes them, but with respect, and his criticism is logical and intellectual criticism.
Thank you very much, Professor Fanai. We're going to Professor Legenhausen for probably the last question. Please go ahead. Professor Legenhausen, please go ahead.
Yeah.
You have raised your hand. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I just want to thank you and the participants and the organizers for this opportunity to have a very fruitful discussion. And I'd like to go back to one of the points that was made when we just started the meeting tonight. Dr. Fanai pointed out that there are these different ways of gaining knowledge. And in the Catholic tradition, there's a saint whose name is Edith Stein. And in one of the books that she wrote, she also talked about this issue of how philosophy and faith can be brought together. And her answer to this question was, what we're trying to do is to seek the truth. And we find truth in revelation, and we also find truth in philosophy. So they must be consistently brought together. And with that, I'll leave you. Thank you.
Okay, would you like to react to that, Professor Burrell?
Of course. I mean, Haj Muhammad and I are old friends, and Edith Stein is a perfect person to speak of because she witnessed by her life to her faith. She was killed in Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
No, thank you very much. I think I want to thank Hamid I want to thank you for setting this up.
Thank you.
And I wish you would ask only one thing, that you share our email addresses so that we can talk with one another that way.
Sure, I will do that, and I will make sure that you remain in communication, both of you interlocutors of today's debate and discussion. Well, it seems like we have reached the end of this session. Vistas to the East third session has been finished, and we are happy that you took part. We are grateful to you for taking part in this discussion. And we are first and foremost, I'm personally grateful to Professor Burrell to have accepted our invitation to take part in this discussion. And also I'm grateful to Professor Fanai for his acceptance of our invitation. I'm thankful to all the participants who have taken part and have asked very good questions. This has been a very fruitful discussion, fruitful night. We'll leave it at this point, hoping that everybody will stay safe in these climactic times. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Mabruk.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Brother
you.
Hamid, Brother Hamid,
Sure.
is this available on demand? And I missed the first two. I didn't know they were
we're
happening.
We're going to hopefully upload them to YouTube after editing certain parts because there was some noise. Yeah, the noise needs to be edited out. So inshallah, I'll let you know, and you'll be able to see them on the college YouTube channel.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right.